So our next panel session this morning is a bit of a follow-up straight on from Vicky's presentation, and it's delving into the data technology, transforming agriculture to better address climate change and sustainability goals. Our panellists are going to explore the opportunities and the challenges in harnessing data-driven solutions to foster sustainable agriculture, enhance productivity, and ensure environmental stewardship in a rapidly changing climate. Now, to guide us through the session, can I please introduce our next facilitator, Leo Soames. So Leo is a senior economist at ABARES, leading the productivity research team. Prior to joining ABARES, Leo led expenditure modelling teams at the Department of Treasury in preparation of budgets and the intergenerational report. He's also held roles in other economic research areas in the Australian Public Service, including at the Bureau of Infrastructure and Transport Research Economics, the Bureau of Communications and Arts Research, and at the Productivity Commission. Over to you, Leo.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Claire. And let me add my welcome to this session on data-driven farming. We've got a fantastic panel here with experts from policy to paddock. But before I introduce them, just a shameless plug for questions. If you're online, please do put them in the app. If you're in the room, please roll up your shoulders, roll that arm, get that energy going, lift the curiosity glow stick. It really helps us being able to see where the questions are coming from in the room. The lights are very bright, the panel is even brighter, and that just helps us make sure that we can answer your questions. It's my pleasure to introduce the panel. I'll start with Richard Heath. He's the Chief Executive Officer of the Zero Net Emissions Agricultural CRC. Richard's extensive experience in Australian agriculture sector extends across multiple high-profile roles, including as Executive Director of the Australian Farm Institute, Associate Professor of Agronomy at the Farm Management at University of Sydney, Director of the Nuffield Australia Farming Scholars, and Richard is also a Non-Executive Director of the Grains Research Development Corporation. Verity Schmidt was the inaugural CEO for Farmers for Climate Action and has recently rejoined the team. Most recently, Verity has been CEO of Ag Zero in WA, a farmer-led organisation committed to engaging and empowering farmers and rural communities to advance climate solutions. Verity grew up in sheep and wheat country of WA's wheat belt and has spent her life championing the voices of farmers on critical issues. Jacqui Vitas is the General Manager of Methodology and Data Sciences Division at the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Jacqui's held senior positions in economic statistics since 2010 and from 2023 has had great involvement in the ABS's Environmental and Economic Accounting Program. Jacqui is the executive sponsor for the ABS and Statistics Indonesia Partnership and the elected co-chair of the UN Committee of Experts on Environmental and Economic Accounts. And a huge thanks to Jacqui for coming today after being up until 1 o'clock in the morning at one of the UN meetings. Merci beaucoup. Robert Mackenzie is the director of Macka's Australian Black Angus, a family-owned and innovative paddock-to-plate Angus beef cattle farm based in the Hunter Valley and Gloucester, New South Wales. Macka's have now achieved carbon neutrality within their pastoral operation without having to rely on offsets or large-scale tree planting. With long-term vision, Robert, along with his family and team, strive to address carbon levels further and pave the way for a more productive and sustainable future. Please join me in welcoming the panel. Robert, I'd really love to start with you. It'd be great to hear a little bit about your journey to carbon neutrality. What was the driver to move to that, and what sort of data and information was really most helpful in getting there?
Yeah, well, that's a big question. I think for us, a family beef operation, I work with my father and I work with my 2 boys, and I get told what to do every day. And we sat down as a family when the MLA announced CN30, carbon neutral 2030. At that point, we had no idea what that meant. We had no idea what that looked like, let alone how do we achieve that. So we're a large-scale operation. We have about 16,000 acres, run about 3,500 commercial cows, 600 stud cows. So we chose to do some soil tests within our operation, and that showed areas that had multiple grass species, areas that had more stock rotation, areas that just had that little bit more attention to detail, had higher levels of carbon. So from there we we embarked on 1,400 soil samples every year, and we've been doing that consistently, and that has shown what we need to do to become better farmers and what we need to do to sequester carbon. And then the benefits have been tenfold in that focus on sustainability, or that focus on best practices. That's worked well for us.
Fantastic. Verity, I'd like to come to you next. You've been at the forefront when it comes to encouraging the agriculture sector and rural communities to drive climate, environmental, sustainability outcomes. Could you tell us a little bit about what that's been like and what role data and evidence have played?
That's a really kind interpretation of what I've been doing for a few years, Leo, so thanks. We'll start with that. I think this is where it's really exciting. And I go back to the point that Vicky made, and I'll quote her directly. It was that climate is here, climate is overwhelming, so we're not going to do anything. And that's sort of the ethos that sometimes you hear out in the bush. And, that's not what we want the data to actually say. What's really critically important, what I'm really proud that Farmers for Climate Action and other organisations have been able to do, is to really take the science into the paddock, to work with leading experts in the climate space to bring that data, but to then actually provide pathways forward as well, so that we can stare the challenge really clearly in the face. We're not talking about, running away with hyperbole. We're actually simply looking at what does the science tell us about our trajectory, and then what sits within our locus of control for farmers, for land managers, for rural communities to actually be able to take action on.
Fantastic. And have there been sort of particular pieces of information that have been most helpful in driving that?
Yeah, there absolutely has been. So we've had the absolute privilege of training over the last few years almost 400 farmers to become climate leaders around the country. And that's been a pretty extraordinary process to work through. And those farmers range from far north Queensland, right across to Western Australia, down to Tasmania and South Australia as well. So we've really got so many different industries across the country covered. And really the key bits of data that are just so fundamentally important is when we look beyond the farm gate, it's understanding the trajectory and the risks that start to occur, which is why it was so exciting to see the National Climate Risk Assessment being released. And I'm really, big conversation that we certainly have with our communities. But also, it's then at a farm gate level, and this is where the work that Macka has done and the work that ZNE Ag CRC do is so exciting as well. It's knowing your numbers. So what can farmers do that sits directly within their core remit so that we can, absolutely be advocating for really strong economy-wide emission reduction, which is critical, but also have farmers really clearly in the driving seat of, well, what can we do on our own farms and within our own sector?
Fantastic. Thank you. That's a really good segue, I think, to Richard. In your capacity leading a CRC, you're at that nexus between industry, academia and policy. How do you see each of these and how they think about data and technology when it comes to sustainability? Where's the alignment and where are the divergences?
So if I start with farmers, farm businesses, farmers want data to give them insight in how to prove their business, plain and simple. Academia wants data to understand the processes that are going into the science, or really anything within a farm business, pull it apart, tease it apart, understand how to improve it and make it better. Government policy needs data to help them have informed policy development and basically lead to compliance or regulation around understanding in those first two circumstances whether they're happening or not. So the alignment is that it is all looking at fundamentally the same thing, but the divergence is there's quite different lenses and contexts in terms of how it's applied. So if we use nitrogen fertiliser as an example, really simple set of data at a farm business level. If you can use less nitrogen fertiliser to grow the same amount of product, and there's a saving, it's less nitrous oxide, it's a good emission story, it's a good sustainability story, very simple data. Academia will look at teasing that apart to understand what has actually happened, what's the chemical and biological processes that has made that happen, all the data around that so we can improve it and scale it. Policy though, and this is where it gets difficult in this current circumstance and where there becomes a lot of angst. We can't measure nitrous oxide emissions at source. It's invisible. So there is actually no data at source around that. So what we rely on is methods. And methods as a proxy for data in greenhouse gas emissions is where there is so much confusion, so much duplication, just a confusion about how that is going to develop. But at the moment, it's essential, or it's really the only pathway we have at a policy level to actually understand what's going on and then account for what's going on. How does that reduction in fertiliser at the farm business level, which the farmer is measuring very simply, actually translate up to the national accounts on greenhouse gas emissions and go through all these processes on the way through methods and reporting, which are data proxies? There's a lot of divergence happening there and a lot of confusion.
And I think that's a really good segue to Jacqui, who's really uniquely placed in terms of data collection, data governance and data use from that sort of macro ABS level. What do you see as the trends in best practice data collection when it comes to climate sustainability? What do you think Australia is doing well, and are there other jurisdictions where we should be having a look at what they're doing?
So I really like your framing in terms of different layers. I mean, that's one of the things I've been listening here is you've got kind of, what I would call official statistics, which is more the macro view, and then you kind of go all the way down to, what individuals want to know to make decision making, whether that's in relation to their businesses or their everyday life. So best practice, and I always say good practice, I don't think anything's ever best. Good practice in data collection, I think, is really dependent on what layer you're actually looking at. But I'll just respond to this in terms of from an official statistics perspective. So this is producing, things like national accounts, environmental economic accounts, lots of other major economic and macroeconomic indicators. Is one of the key things, and there's three key things from my perspective, is we have a lot of international classifications, frameworks, standards and definitions, and that really they should be almost the spine of what we do, because then that allows us to be able to compare our estimates with other countries, and it also ensures that when we're looking at different data that we are comparing like for like. So for example, from a definitional perspective, it gives us this ability to bring data together from various different sources into a coherent framework. So something like the system of environmental economic accounts, which I think will be more and more important as we go forward, allows us to bring different data sources together to tell the picture of the interactions between the environment and the economy for Australia. And we also have accounts for ecosystem accounts as well. So that's, I think, one of the trends, and I think it's not a new trend, but I think it's becoming a more important trend that we do remember there are all these standards. I think the second thing is non-survey data. Again, I don't call it admin data because admin data for me comes from governments, and we're getting lots and lots of non-survey data from private organisations and other sources as well. But there is increasing opportunities to use this non-survey data, but we need to be able to understand it and why it was collected, etc. And then I think there's another opportunity then off the back of that non-survey data is about how we can use data not just to produce it for estimates or particular insights, but also reuse it as well. And somebody was telling me yesterday about the property identification code that comes from the National Livestock Identification System, and how that now is being used in terms of assessing sustainability of meat exports to Europe as well. So there's opportunities then to be able to reuse data, but with some caveats that it is the right data. So those are the three things really I think are there in terms of good practice.
Fantastic. And I mean, in terms of thinking now about good practice, I'm keen to get the panel's insights based on Vicky Manson's point around some of the challenges beyond the farm gate. And she called out a number of sort of watch points or risks, the natural environment, critical infrastructure supply chains, water security, insurance, finance and capital access, and regional communities and workforce. I'm interested in the panel's views on how that data can be better leveraged, or how data can be better leveraged to address those risks. I think we might just sort of go down the path, if that's all right. Maybe Rob, what are the key risks that you see outside your farm gate, and what sort of data and information help you manage those?
Yeah, look, I probably always look at things very positively. That's how we run our operation. That's how we just live our life. I think that I'll probably say our biggest challenge is we're not telling the story well enough. Okay, that I see is a challenge. We don't share the good news stories that our neighbour does or someone else does. We're pretty isolated all the way down here. We're producing a product that the world wants. Our cost of production's quite high, so we need to leverage off a really good story. But for us, data is key, and we've heard this over the last couple of days, being diverse. So our customer base is very diverse. So when the tariff comes into China, we'll have another customer base to go to. So I just see our industry as pretty good and pretty focused. From a farmer's point of view, I could comfortably say we've got this, but we need your help. Okay, we need that help from big business or upper level of town to help us navigate those complexities and those challenges that we see. For us to navigate sustainability, carbon neutral, biodiversity. Last year we did our whole ESG sustainability framework. That's pretty tough for a family business to sort of manage and go on that quest. We feel that we need your help to understand that a little bit better. We need your help to tell a positive story about this event, okay? So other farmers, hear that you've got our back, if that makes that sense. So I probably didn't really answer your question, but roundabout I got there, maybe.
I think you definitely answered the question.
Right.
If the
It was
resident
probably a little bit over my head too. It was a bit complex.
And appreciate the positivity. As an economist, I'm perennially negative, so it's good that we're bringing balance to this particular panel. Jacqui, over to you. Sort of thinking around measurement to address these risks, what do you see as the sort of key information that should be collected and disseminated, or where there might be gaps?
I think it's more around the measurement challenge. I mean, I think a question was raised after Vicky's presentation, which really, again, resonated with me in terms of I kind of feel like we're drowning in data. And it's like I was listening today, I was going to start counting out how many times somebody told me a number, but I kind of lost count. And then they're saying a number and I'm like, well, where's that number from? And is it an official number? And what was the vintage of it? What's the date stamp on it? And there's all these other things as well. So I think one of the fundamental things that we've got, and again, Vicky mentioned this, was that we've got this multi-dimensional issue here that covers, the economy, the environment, climate, sustainability. We've got massive amounts of, as I say, one of the strengths is we do have frameworks and indicators and definitions, but it's also complicated it. When I work with the United Nations and other international organisations, the number of times somebody wants to say that they want to set up a group to set up another framework and another set of indicators, and I see my life flashing before my eyes. So, I mean, personally, I'm trying really hard at an international level to say, can we rationalise some of these so that we can really focus on measuring what matters and telling a story that goes across the dimensions and is credible and it is robust and it has the data that needs to support it as well. I think that's what's really needed now. We've got lots of data, we're measuring lots of stuff, but we need to actually put that together into some multi-dimensional framework so we can truly tell the story about what's happening in Australia.
Fantastic. Richard, your thoughts on the sort of policy information needed to address some of these risks?
So I think what's going to make a big change in the ability, if I go back to pre-farm gate and how farmers actually think about what's outside of the farm gate that's impacting on them, just to reflect and reinforce what everyone's been saying so far, there is so much being fired at them all the time. And one of those things now that's being fired at them, at everyone, is mandatory emissions reporting, which is the biggest change in corporate reporting since GST. It's huge. It's really, really significant, and it's going to be a mess to begin with. It already is a mess now, with the organisations trying to work out systems, platforms, what they're accounting, standards they should be working against, all those sorts of things. Once we get through that, though, what I'm hopeful for is that that data will actually help with what is material in those supply chains. What can be identified out of that? As the reporting gets better and better, our ability as a whole of economy to look at, well, where's the choke points, what are the blockers for progress, what's really significant or not. I'd like to see more effort applied to how we communicate materiality and all of that to farmers. Because again, because it's new, because they're being told that this is something you need to be aware of, it's drinking from the fire hose. Now, no one tries to understand the entire tax code. You have an accountant to do that. You understand the bits that are really important to your business and what affects your strategic decision making. But at the moment, everyone is trying to understand the entire reporting requirement and standards development and everything to do with emissions, because it's all new and it's all a threat, and not sort of having the help that they need, like an accountant with the tax code, to say, no, you don't have to worry about that. This is the only bit that's material to you. This is what will be important to your business, and this is what will help you identify beyond your farm gate potentially what is going to have an impact. So I think there's a lot of service provision to develop in that area. It's the sort of thing that we're thinking about with the CRC that we can help with as well, in terms of what's material. Don't worry about that. It's not relevant, that sort of thing.
Really sharpening that sort of signal to noise approach for farmers, Verity, your thoughts on the sort of information needed to address these risks?
Yeah, I must confess I laughed when I was invited to speak on a panel on data, because I'm the least numbers person on the planet. So we could talk about economics and I'll talk in stories. But I really, I resonate with what Richard is saying in relation to that translation piece, because it's this fire hose that is coming down the pipeline at farmers where they're feeling, the bulk of all of these decisions are ending up landing with them. So getting that translation piece right in the regions so that it becomes accessible, so the data is meaningful and you're clear on where you need to engage in the system versus where, no, actually, that sits with someone else's remit. Getting that into a really positive story, which sort of talks to the points that Macka was making as well. But then, Leo, to go back to your original point that you made around how do these risks sort of intersect, I think the key one that really resonates for me and for a lot of farmers, and I said before, I don't think in numbers, I think in landscapes, and I think in stories, and I think in people. And so to me, when I look at the risks that Vicky put up before and the other elements of the system, the key one that really comes to mind for me is what are our natural landscapes doing? What are our ecosystems, our infrastructure? Because agriculture is so deeply embedded within that environment. If you find, I think, you'd struggle to find any farmer in the country or on the planet, I believe, who would, want to see their natural environment being run down. Farmers are inherently committed to actually doing the right thing by their environment. Sometimes you see the market signal is leading farmers to have to push their properties really, really hard. And that's where I think this whole space of natural capital accounting, really bringing that data in to be able to tell a holistic whole of farm story, whole of supply chain story that links the climate pressures, builds that climate resilience through building the resilience of the natural infrastructure upon which your farming enterprise is dependent.
No, thank you. I suppose just sort of a follow-up to that around how to reduce that fire hose of information, like how to best sort of target farmers with the information they need. Has there been anything that sort of from your experience where you found things that have really helped cut through to focus the mind?
Yeah, so we do a range of things. A lot of it is about the trusted messenger. So who is it that's actually really being able to talk to farmers? So making sure that it is, for example, the upskilling of whether it's an area that you might have a good land care facilitator that's been around for a while, making sure that those trusted messengers are well equipped to be able to do that translation piece. That might be a bank manager, it might be land care, it might be what is it? It might be one of the NRM groups. So there's a whole range of pathways, but making sure those messengers who are directly connecting with farmers are really able to support them in that translation piece. We find as well building supportive farmer networks is just absolutely critical for being able to navigate through that incredibly noisy space and do it with optimism. And so across the Farmers for Climate Action community, we have a network of around 8,500 farmers Australia-wide now. So being able to bring their knowledge together, provide platforms for them to be able to share those experiences, use positive case studies, and even case studies where things haven't quite gone right is also really critically important, because then you're able to make sure that it's a peer-to-peer learning framework that is underpinned by having those key translators who are the experts in all of these really critically important areas of data.
Thanks. That point of trusted messenger really does resonate in terms of getting information across. I've got several more questions, but I think we might go to the room first to see if there's any. We've got one over there.
Hello, Ben Westcott from Bloomberg. Thanks for your excellent talk. What I'm about to say doesn't just apply to agriculture, obviously, but I think there is something about the isolation of farmers that does make it more important. Something that Jacqui mentioned about just the sheer amount of data, that leads, particularly in this age of AI and the internet, to a growing amount of misinformation as well. And do you think that what is the ways that we can tackle the growing amount of misinformation that will come in as people are seeking answers to these problems around, climate issues and dangers to their businesses and livelihoods?
Thanks so much, Ben. Jacqui, over to you.
Could you do a smaller question? I mean, it's a great question, and I think it's just going to grow, that misinformation risk. I don't even know if it's a risk anymore, it's an issue, in terms of there's so much information. I think, this is just my personal opinion, is just helping people have, we call it in the ABS the sniff test. So, we might be producing estimates and, we get this unusual number and we're kind of looking at it and we go, well, from a sniff test perspective, does this really look sensible? Like, is it plausible? What's happened, in the environment or the economy that would actually explain this? I think if we can help people do sniff tests, obviously they're not going to live and breathe data like a lot of people in this room do. But just that thing about, like Verity was saying, in terms of who's the messenger? Is it a trusted source? Is it understandable? Does it stack up with my understanding of what's going on? So I think at the very basic level, if we can just try and help promote this sniff testing to help people that realise that not every number can be trusted and used for a multitude of purposes. But if you've got any great ideas how to solve it, I'd love to hear about it afterwards.
Fantastic. I think we've got some questions online, so I might go to Claire.
We do. We've got a question from Katie McRobert. She's asking, is net zero genuinely achievable for Australian agriculture? And if not, what should we be striving for to meet climate sustainability challenges?
Fantastic. Maybe we might go to you, Richard, and then maybe you, Rob, on your experiences.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. I knew I could rely on you, something like that. No, is the simple answer, and it's not expected to be for agriculture as a sector. So the Ag and Land Decarbonisation Plan has a 28% reduction target by 2050, and that recognises that agriculture is different. Agriculture is a biological process. It's not a completely technological process. Every other sector of the economy has technology pathways that can get towards real zero or close to it through adoption of technology, and it's just a question of economics and scale and making that work. Agriculture is biological. There are emissions from biology. Animals produce methane. We're never going to eliminate that completely. We can get better at it. We can improve it. Residues break down and release nitrous oxide and carbon dioxide. That's biology. We're never going to stop doing that. So I think, to relate to the previous question about the information environment that we live in and how that sort of ties into very simple messages about net zero and everyone's got to do it, and it is a complex and a difficult message when we start sort of trying to communicate agriculture's role, because agriculture should contribute like every other sector. But target setting and the nuance in target setting and things like biogenic methane compared to fossil methane, there's all these things that come into play that take quite a nuanced understanding to understand what is achievable and what the target should be and what we should be striving towards. Now, I think it's getting better. I think the environment is getting better around that but it's because it's all new and it's developing, and the science and understanding around it continues to improve.
Thanks. Rob, keen to get your view. I mean, you've brought Mackas to carbon neutrality. What do you think the scope is for other farms and other parts of the agriculture sector to do what you've done?
Yeah, well, this is pretty complex of our journey, but to answer that question, I don't believe that you have to become carbon neutral. Okay, I'm a strong believer that you need to know your numbers. And once you see your numbers, once you see what your power bill was, once you see what your fuel bill is, once you see, how much methane you produce, from there you can actually work on reducing that footprint. The most important thing is to reduce your footprint. So we become carbon neutral. Okay, and that is we sequester more carbon into our operation through best pasture management. So we're still productive, or we're more productive. But we didn't just stay at that. We then focused on making that animal more productive on farm. How did we do that? We made sure that the animal doesn't walk any more than 800 metres to get a drink of water, so it's eating less, it's conserving energy. Big focus on genetics. We've spent a lot of money on genetics in the last probably 6 years. Our latest acquisition was a bull out of Scotland, and that bull was #1 in the world for feed efficiency. We have to get smarter, right? So many animals are in feedlots now. If we can feed them 20% less, that's a game changer. So we purchased that bull out of Scotland, as well as we've made some massive genetic acquisitions. On farm, we've used more solar panels. On farm, when we buy a new piece of equipment now, we actually look more than ever before on what that fuel usage is. So we're reducing our footprint with our fuel usage. So genetics is playing a massive part. So from there, it's knowing your numbers and then just adjusting it from that and making those incremental changes within your operation that you're actually reducing your footprint. I think if everyone took that first step of knowing what your footprint is, making those changes, getting on the train, you then feel that you're making a difference, and that's what we probably need to focus on. For us, we're in a high rainfall area, so it is probably easier to grow really, prominent, fresh, green, clean grass, and that's what sequester carbon quite well. But you can sequester carbon through a cropping, less tillage, so lessen your footprint, do what you can, and you're on that right path.
Fantastic. We might go to further questions in the room. We've got one over there.
Thank you for another wonderful panel session. It's Chris Walk from DAF here. Back to sort of AI, and I had a quick chat with Claire, who mentioned Matt and Andrew are getting a lot of interest online about AI. So from the misinformation side of things, how can AI, given there's so many data points, data sources, data storage, can that help you guys, and it relates to Vicky as well, rationalise, I think was a rationalisation of all that data, and then sharing that, can it be a positive tool? And Macka, I'd be interested in, just in a practical sense, how AI has helped you on farm. Thank you.
Well, maybe we start with that. AI on farm, Rob. Has that been something you've thought about or are implementing?
So we have, like I said, quite a lot of moving parts. We've got a commercial operation, we've got a very large stud operation, and then a box beef program where we process our own genetics and send that all around the world. So AI for us, I actually spoke to my son and Corey, who looks after the genetic side of the operation. I suggested maybe some breed plans with AI, and they came straight back and said it doesn't know as much as I know yet, And then I put a little bit into AI and then sent it to him, and he was probably a little bit shocked. So AI is obviously an important tool that we need to obviously manage everything down to weather, to crop, to animal health, because it's right there, it's right at our fingertips. And if we don't adopt it, if we don't start to use it, we will be left behind. So for agriculture, AI is going to be definitely a very important part of our growth. So yeah, we do use it. I've even used it to critique an email or critique a LinkedIn post. I shouldn't say that because I like to think that my LinkedIn posts are pretty, natural and organic, but it's, my spelling's not the greatest, right? But AI is definitely an important tool that we definitely need to use, and we have to use it straight away or we'll be left behind. And I think a lot of farmers are looking at it, a lot of farmers are playing with it, and it has the ability for us, especially with breed plans, especially with genetics, because genetics, as I said, is definitely a massive part of where we're going, because the right genetics, naturally that animal will produce less methane. And we're focused on producing less methane, whether it is an additive that we use on farm, and we've developed our own mineral lick to reduce methane. We haven't measured that. We have had some ag scent equipment, OptiWay equipment, but we'll probably go down the Vitelli path. So AI has definitely helped us navigate some things, but also shorten a big document that I don't have time to read, and I would struggle to be able to absorb all of that information. I can actually put that document into AI and ask it to give me some key dot points, how it could help or support our operation.
Verity, I'm keen for your experience for farmers for climate action. Has AI come up much there in terms of a tool to be used?
We're certainly seeing it with a lot of farmers around the country starting to experiment, and play is basically the framing, so they're using it for improved ag techs. What does that mean to actually be able to get better data, run through AI processes to be able to calculate your efficiencies at a really granular paddock level in a cropping scenario, for example. So seeing that application of AI is certainly starting to occur there, and that can potentially have interesting implications for then management decisions and how they occur, which hopefully we'll see an emissions result, because it's all about efficiency at the end of the day for farmers. Every kilo of methane or nitrous oxide is wasted productivity and efficiency at a farm gate level. So it's certainly starting to be explored there. It's also increasingly becoming a tool that farmers are really using to engage a lot more in the policy space as well, and that broader spectrum of what's happening beyond the farm gate, which is really quite interesting, some of the things that are starting to come into our network from the way that farmers are using it. There is always that big caution, it's the blind spots that can start to occur as well, and so that's some of the other feedback that we receive is, how do you use AI most efficiently in these settings? Where do you trust? Where do you still go and stress test? And there's some incredible data sets that AI is now sweeping and pulling together, but then for us, when we look at how do we use it as an organisation, it's always go back and stress test it, put that against lived reality, make sure that we're not just taking those AI interpretations as face value, make sure that we put a farmer lens over absolutely everything that we do.
That's excellent. And sort of moving on from that sort of farmer lens, Richard, I'm sort of keen to get a sense from you at the CRC. How is AI coming up there? Is it forming a core part of the work? Is there growing interest?
In so many ways. There's so many ways that we can use that across research projects, but also I'll just briefly touch on the farmer lens first before I get to that, because digital twins, such a useful and important way that farmers can test interventions without having to make a significant investment before they then decide, yep, okay, this looks like it might work, we'll make an investment. I see them becoming more and more useful and speeding up adoption to give the confidence to make an investment on an intervention. But yeah, more broadly around research and the sorts of things that it's going to enable, change at scale is something that AI can really help with the outcomes of research. So one super cool investment that we've got that I really like is looking at screening all the native and endemic plant species across Northern Australia in native grazing systems, because across Northern Australia it's unimproved pasture, they're just grazing whatever's out there. Every plant species has a different methane potential when it's digested by an animal. We know there's huge variation. We haven't really characterised where that variation is from plant species to plant species, and then where those plant species sit in the landscape. So we're investing in doing that screening and understanding the biological basis of each species and how methane efficient it can be, and then understanding where those plants are in the landscape. Now, that's only really enabled by machine learning and AI with imagery at scale to go and do that, because you couldn't possibly go out and actually manually map all of that across the expanse of Northern Australia. But once we've got that information, the opportunities that opens up through things like virtual fencing, again, AI enabled, to direct animals to more methane efficient pastures, which on the whole, or species, the real added benefit of this, on the whole, are more productive as well. The management implications of that are huge, absolutely gigantic.
Lots of opportunities.
Yeah.
Jacqui, I wanted to come to you. Is AI perhaps a way to sort of do that sniff test, or does that bring its own sort of risks and challenges that also have to be considered at the same time?
I think it's a very useful tool in our toolbox, but I think it's, I was just reflecting when people were and I'm biased, okay, I'm starting to feel like I'm really old, and so new things I'm a bit more sceptical about. And then I start reading things about, how AI was originally being trained on literature from the 60s and 70s, and it has inherited biases, in terms of particular population groups. So then I kind of get my bias, but I'm trying to be open-minded about this. I think when we talk about using AI to maybe actually generate its own data, so for example, looking at plants and things like that, then I think this is my personal view, there are huge opportunities for that, because that's actually adding to our information base, which obviously is very crowded still, but it's something that would be really difficult for us to do and go out and count every species over a huge geographical area. I think we do have to be a bit cautious about where we're using AI on existing data sets, and I think there's two elements to that. So, a lot of, if you're using AI to generate information from a large existing data set, then you have to be careful that you're using the data set in an appropriate way. And I think there's a good, for me, I think distinguishing that between using AI to generate new data and new insights for things that would be really difficult for us to measure without, I'm not going to get down on my hands and knees and be counting plants over 100K. But when we are using it to gain insights and to try and do summaries of existing data sets, we just have to be careful about understanding what's that underlying base data that we're actually using. And I think that's, again, where the sniff test comes in.
I think that's a really interesting insight between using AI on existing data versus using AI to generate new data. Something really worth considering. We might go to a question online. I might throw to Claire.
Yeah, we've got a question here. Many large corporates have ambitious climate and sustainability targets but don't work directly with farmers. From your experiences, how can corporates still drive data-driven farming outcomes and emissions reductions across their supply chains?
Wow, that's a big question. Verity, you want to take a crack at that one?
Oh, yeah, I can. So we talk a lot with corporates in the sector, really try to make those connections in a really positive way. And so, engaging with the likes of Woolworths, for example, but also engaging sort of more broadly with other supply chain actors and going, well, what support is required to get back to a farm gate level? So it's not just pressure. And I think this is often one of the challenges within the ag sector, is there is a lot of expectations that are put back on farmers. Some real, some perceived. And so I think for us, where the constant conversation that we have in with corporates is, okay, so what support should you be providing to your farmer base, your supplier base if you're in that space, or your consumer base if you are, the nutrients, et cetera, of the world? what role do you play in that trusted messenger, key advisor, actually being able to support whatever that transition or those practice changes really need to look like? And how do you engage proactively in that space so this doesn't come through as just another pressure that farmers are facing? So it becomes something that's a really constructive, much more partnership, shared value approach to be able to deliver the kind of outcomes that we require as a society.
Yeah, look, I'm seeing a big change at the moment in terms of the willingness of supply chain organisations to work with farmers to deliver solutions. And it's being driven by, I get back to this corporate reporting angle, the urgency that they all have now to have demonstrable emissions reductions in their supply chains. And previously, the methods that they might have been deploying against standards to demonstrate that have been top-down to some extent, driven from the top down. And the supply really hasn't been there that would have been anticipated by those organisations to then show, to have farmers sign up against methods and to be able to show emissions reductions in the supply chains. So what's happening now is this realisation that if they work directly with farmers to understand what is working on farm, what is delivering emissions reduction, and then bottom up build a methodology around that, the likelihood that they're going to get that supply of methods is much, much higher. So just a little sort of prod and push here to a government audience. Method development is so critical, and it is why voluntary markets are starting to overtake the ACCU market, because it's just not keeping up with the method development pace that is needed for that to be a preferred marketplace, which is a real pity because it is the highest integrity marketplace that there is. It's universally recognised as that, but unless it is more agile and keeps up with method development, the voluntary markets are going to keep taking that market share.
And is there something that you feel the government should be doing to become more agile? Is there one sort of element in particular?
Just push through methods. I resource that capability more than it is so that we can have faster method development.
Fantastic. Rob, I might go to you in terms of the question from online, just around how you see like your work with your supply chains. How are those sort of shifting in terms of getting towards more sustainable agriculture?
Yeah, look, so over the last few years, we've seen a lot more support from either our bank, so CBA, we work closely with them, or we work closely for them, whatever it might be. So, they've been, obviously, they have Scope 3 emissions to meet, and they want to be banking customers or their clients that are proactive and sustainable. So they've offered supports, whether it's through a green loan, etc. ACMIA, this is our second year that we're now with ACMIA Insurance. Their team came to our farm, liked what we're doing, and had us down as a low risk operation. So from there, we have received a much better, I shouldn't say that because one of the ladies from ACMIA are here, but we've received a much better deal with ACMIA than our previous insurers. So that's on farm. We are getting, you mentioned a nutrient, well, we're getting, support from our rural trader on how to do things better, seed companies. But let's say post-farm gate, our customers, so I missed, I'm here instead of a meeting with Qantas online today, so one of our customers is Qantas. And when we first went to them, it wasn't about that we were sustainable. It wasn't about what we were actually doing on farm. They wanted to know what were we doing in the community. What were we doing for the industry? So that's why we did our whole ESG sustainability framework, not for them, because we had enough proof when we brought it all together that we were, good community, family, as a lot of farmers are. But for one thing that we took to them is, okay, you want a story, you want to be aligned to a sustainable operation, a community-focused operation. We have problems with certain cuts of meat. So everyone wants a strip loin, a cube roll, T-bone. Okay, but what about our trims? So hats off to Qantas and Donata. So our 100% Angus beef sausages on the Qantas breakfast menu. And today we had a meeting regarding hamburgers for Cathay Pacific and meat pies, and our tenderloins are on there too. So we are seeing more support on both fronts, on farm and off farm, on what can we do to help you become a little bit better on farm, and what can we do to support you. Okay, you have a problem with a 65 CL trim. Okay, can we make it into a sausage? Yes, we can. 50 CL trim, well, we're now making 100% Angus beef dumplings. So we have the big end of town there supporting us to use that whole nose to tail, and that's a big focus for us. You know, giving that whole animal, you know, the I suppose the credible, I'm not sure what the right word is, but giving justice to that whole animal, what that animal has given us, what that animal gives you, but put value on that whole part of that animal. So no longer are we selling, you know, cheap trim to the US. We're value adding it here in Australia and giving the consumer in Australia 100% Angus beef sausage, a gold award-winning meat pie or hamburger patties. So it's good that we have companies that are supporting us.
And that's really interesting to hear as well, their sort of focus on priorities around helping the community, but also around, you know, maximising that efficiency for the output that you create. So fascinating.
Can I just add to that?
Yes,
quickly, Leo? One of the things that we hear from corporates increasingly now is this growing recognition that farmers are really that central pillar of broader resilience across the system. So because of the role of farmers as being really responsible for managing big chunks of the landscape, it builds in that ecosystem resilience, but also there's the food security and the export narrative that all comes into play. So really having those conversations, whether it's with CBA, etc., you know, we have a lot of those, and it's really making sure that that role, that critically important role of the farmer is understood right throughout that supply chain. And it's been really heartening to actually see that start to shift over the last decade.
Absolutely. I think we've got time for one more question in the room. Yes.
Richard Golden, one of Brad's farmers, along with Macka.
Hey, mate.
Statistics is a pretty dry thing, really, Jacqui, but anyway. I'm afraid I have to acknowledge that I'm almost identically in the same mental boat as you, and that's your life, that's your livelihood. One of the things that constantly comes back to me is not about data gathering or data analysis, but what data have you chosen to gather? What did you gather it for? And is the analysis that's being applied to that data actually credible? And the reason for my question here is that it's the property identification codes stuff that the EU has decided is a possible simple method of accrediting non-deforested supply sources for their beef, for our beef or for them. We actually have 6 different property identification codes in our cattle management system, and we have more than 20 property identification codes in the ears of the animals that we have bought to background, and all of them go to feedlots for export. It's really complicated to say, for us to say, oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, righto. I don't have a particular problem with the idea that that might be a simple way to accredit whether our livestock supply is from deforested areas, but we're in a very large geographic area of Queensland, and there's many livestock producers are much more diverse than we are. And when you then add that those livestock are coming from New South Wales, far western Queensland, far northern Queensland, all of the analysis of the data that is gained by giving access to whoever to our NLIS database, it almost frightens me, because I don't know how it can be credibly analysed for a reasonable output.
Thanks so much, Richard. Jacqui. Jacqui, maybe we go to you for this one, noting we're almost out of time, but just in terms of that sort of social license for using data and geographic data, any thoughts on Richard's concern?
So before we start, one, you've made me really hungry talking about food. And secondly, I don't see how anybody can think statistics are boring and dry. But anyway, it's a really good question. So, I mean, this is where data cleaning comes in as well. So, you know, unfortunately, no data comes to us in a nice package with a beautiful bow on it. I wish it did. But what we have to do is ensure that we're taking the data and we are doing that data cleaning, and we're looking for duplications, and we're looking for anomalies in the data, and then we're actually going back and querying that data with people if there's an ability to do that. I can't comment in terms of the accuracy of the property indicator codes in the National Livestock, but I can comment in terms of for ABS when we're using data, especially in relation to ag modernisation, where we're trying to replace surveys with other survey data. Like, we spend a lot of time cleaning data, poring through it, trying to understand it, editing that data, quality assuring it against other data sets as well. And I think that's what we need to continue to be able to do to try and get rid of some of those data mishaps.
One to discuss over lunch, and I think the technology is very keen to get to lunch as well, because I think we've just had the microphones cut off. But we could keep going for much longer. People are hungry for data and insights. They're more hungry for lunch. Please join me in thanking Richard, Verity, Jacqui and Robert for their great insights and contributions.